On July 18, 1997, an executive at Kmart's headquarters in Michigan signed a contract that gave away an entire chain of home improvement stores, not sold in any normal sense of the word. $10 million in cash for a business Kmart had spent 13 years building into hundreds of locations. In exchange, the buyer took on $2 billion of that chain's debt, and Kmart simply got to stop thinking about it. It was the fourth time in 3 years Kmart had done something like this. Sports Authority, gone. OfficeMax, gone. Borders, the bookstore chain that would go on to become one of the 2 biggest names in American book retail, gone too. 4 businesses that Kmart itself had built or bought and grown into real, functioning companies. And Kmart let go of every one of them on purpose, while telling shareholders the moves would save the company. Kmart did not lose these 4 businesses to a smarter competitor or a market crash. It handed them over, with its own signature, to help pay for a rescue plan for a much bigger business that was already failing. And that rescue did not work. Not that year, not the next, not for the next 25. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why a company would give away its healthiest, fastest-growing limbs to try to save a body that was already dying, and why it did the same thing, in different forms, again and again, for the next quarter century. The company behind Kmart did not start as a discount chain at all. In 1899, a salesman named Sebastian Kresge opened a small store where almost everything cost a nickel or a dime. By 1912, he had 85 of them and more than $10 million a year in sales. The Kresge company spent the next 50 years as a steady, unglamorous 5 and dime chain. Then, in March 1962, under company president Harry Cunningham, it opened something new in a suburb of Detroit called Garden City, a large, self-service discount store, stocked floor to ceiling, prices slashed on everything. They called it Kmart. 17 more opened that same year. 3 years later, store managers started rolling a rotating blue light down the aisle to flag a surprise markdown, blaring the words that would end up in the American vocabulary. Attention, Kmart shoppers. By 1977, the discount stores had become so dominant that the parent company changed its own name to match them, Kmart Corporation. For 2 decades, Kmart's formula worked. By the 1980s, it was the second largest retailer in the United States, behind only Sears, with well over 2,000 stores stretched across the country. In 1987, a Kmart lifer named Joseph Antonini took over as chairman and chief executive, and he looked at the retail landscape and saw a threat building on the horizon. A new kind of store was emerging, one that did not sell a little of everything the way Kmart did, but sold everything in one category and nothing else. An entire warehouse of sporting goods, an entire warehouse of office supplies, an entire warehouse of tools and lumber. Analysts were starting to call them category killers, because they could outstock and outprice a general discount store in their one specialty every single time. Antonini decided the way to survive that threat was to own it. In 1984, Kmart bought Walden Books and a home improvement chain that would become Builders Square. In 1990, it bought a small 10-store sporting goods chain called the Sports Authority, and the same year took a stake in a young office supply company called OfficeMax, a stake it grew past 90% within a year. In 1992, it bought Borders, then a 22-store book superstore chain, and folded it in alongside Walden Books. Antonini was not only buying companies, either. He pushed a store renovation program and built a new format called the Super Kmart Center, adding full grocery sections to the biggest locations, trying to make the core stores bigger and more modern at the same time he was building the specialty empire around them. On paper, in 1992, all of it looked like genius. Kmart posted its highest sales and profits in company history that year, sitting on top of a general discount chain, a renovated store network, and 4 separate specialty retail empires, each one growing in a market segment analysts were calling the future of American shopping. Except 1992 was also the last good year Kmart would ever have. Almost immediately after that peak, the company posted 8 straight quarters of disappointing earnings. Its stock price fell 74% in less than 3 years. And here is the question that decided everything that came next. What, exactly, was broken. The honest answer was the core discount stores themselves. While Antonini had been building a conglomerate of specialty chains and renovating the biggest locations into super Kmart centers, Kmart's original 2,000-plus ordinary discount stores had been quietly falling behind on the basics. Inventory systems were outdated. Distribution was slow. Stores were dirty and understocked compared to a fast-growing rival out of Arkansas named Walmart, which had spent the same decade pouring money into logistics and technology instead of acquisitions. Walmart's own trucks and warehouses could restock a shelf faster than Kmart could even find out it was empty. And by the early 1990s, that quiet advantage in the unglamorous plumbing of retail, not marketing, not store count, was starting to decide the whole competition. But that was not the diagnosis Kmart's board landed on. Instead, the story that took hold inside the company was that the specialty chains had distracted management, that Antonini had spent a decade building an empire of side businesses while the core went unattended, and that the fix was to strip the conglomerate back down to a single, focused discount retailer. It was not entirely wrong. Attention really had been divided, but it aimed nearly all of the blame at the one part of the company that was actually still growing, and let the part that was quietly losing the war to Walmart keep almost all of the benefit of the doubt. So Kmart started selling. In 1994, the company announced it would take its specialty chains public and cash out. 70% of the Sports Authority and 75% of OfficeMax were sold off that year through public offerings. In 1995, Borders Group went public too, and Kmart sold off what remained of its stakes in Sports Authority and OfficeMax, along with a wholesale chain called Pace and more than 800 of its own auto service centers. Board members and Wall Street analysts framed every one of these sales as discipline. Get back to basics, focus on the core, stop being a conglomerate, and go back to being a discount retailer. This is the part most people get wrong about Kmart. So if you want the rest of the story, stay with me, because the sales did not fix the thing they were supposed to fix. The cash from Sports Authority, OfficeMax, and Borders went to prop up store renovations and pay down debt at the discount chain, the same discount chain that was still losing customers to Walmart every single quarter. Joseph Antonini, who had spent 31 years at the company and built the specialty chains the board was now dismantling, lost his chairman title in January 1995 and resigned as chief executive that March, replaced by an outsider named Floyd Hall. By 1995, every major acquisition Antonini had made was gone, and 2 years later came Builders Square, sold for $10 million in cash to a buyer who assumed $2 billion of its debt, merged into a struggling rival called Hetchinger, and shut down completely within 2 years. Kmart had traded its 4 fastest-growing businesses for cash, spent that cash trying to fix a discount chain, and the discount chain kept declining anyway. Under Floyd Hall and then his successors through the rest of the 1990s, Kmart tried almost everything short of fixing the fundamentals. New store formats, new marketing campaigns, a revived blue light special. None of it closed the gap with Walmart, which by the end of the decade had become not just bigger than Kmart, but the largest retailer on the planet, built on exactly the boring, unglamorous supply chain investment that Kmart had skipped in favor of acquisitions a decade earlier. In May 2000, a former drugstore executive named Chuck Conaway joined Kmart, first as president, then as chief executive. Conaway understood part of the diagnosis correctly this time. He closed weak stores, revived the blue light special once more, and tore out Kmart's aging distribution centers in favor of modern ones, along with new software just to track what was actually on the shelves. For a company that had spent the 1980s buying entire retail categories, it was a strange kind of humility, rebuilding the plumbing nobody notices instead of chasing another headline acquisition. But Conaway also made a fatal bet of his own. He decided Kmart could win customers back by matching Walmart on price directly, an aggressive discounting war against a company whose entire supply chain had been engineered for exactly that fight. Walmart simply cut prices further and kept its margins intact. Kmart's cash reserves, already thin after a decade of acquisitions and divestitures, started disappearing fast. By the end of 2001, disappointing holiday sales had drained what little cushion remained, and the company that once owned 4 thriving specialty retail chains could no longer pay for the inventory sitting on its own shelves. On January 22, 2002, Kmart filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, the largest retail bankruptcy in United States history at that point. 17 years to the year after it had first started buying up the specialty chains it hoped would secure its future. The filing listed $16.29 billion in assets against $10.35 billion in debt, with only $366 million in cash on hand, a fraction of what would be needed to keep the lights on through a normal week of business. The company secured $2 billion in emergency financing from a group of banks just to keep its stores stocked while the case worked through the courts. 6 weeks later, on March 8th, Kmart announced it would close 284 stores and lay off 22,000 employees. 3 days after that announcement, Chuck Conaway resigned as chief executive. Years later, in 2005, the Securities and Exchange Commission sued him for misleading Kmart's investors in the months before the bankruptcy. A jury found him liable in 2009, and he agreed to pay $5.5 million to settle the case in 2010. The company that had once been so large it could afford to build and then discard 4 separate specialty retail empires could not, in the end, afford to keep its own original stores stocked and open. Here is where the story turns strange. Kmart emerged from bankruptcy in under 18 months, reorganized around a hedge fund manager named Edward Lampert, who had quietly bought up Kmart's distressed debt during the bankruptcy and ended up controlling the reorganized company. And in November 2004, this same company, barely 2 years removed from the largest retail bankruptcy in American history, announced it would buy Sears, Roebuck and Company, a much larger, much older rival, for roughly $11 billion. The merger closed in March 2005, forming Sears Holdings Corporation, at the time the 3rd largest retailer in the United States, with Lampert as chairman controlling nearly 40% of the combined company. The business that had given away its healthiest specialty chains to save its core a decade earlier had just used its own bankruptcy filing as leverage to acquire an entire second empire, one many times its own size. It did not go well either. Sears Holdings spent the next 13 years closing stores under both banners, unable to fix the same underlying problem that had sunk Kmart the first time: aging stores nobody had reinvested in for years. In October 2018, it filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy of its own, a second bankruptcy in 16 years for the businesses under that roof. Lampert's new company, Transformco, bought up what remained of Sears and Kmart out of that second bankruptcy in 2019, and the closures never really stopped. By October 2024, the last full-size Kmart store on the American mainland in Bridgehampton, New York, closed its doors. By the spring of 2025, roughly 5 Kmart stores remained on Earth, one of them in Miami, the rest scattered across Guam and the U.S. Virgin Islands. A company that once ran more than 2,400 stores, employed some 350,000 people, and owned 4 separate businesses that would each go on to become a defining name in its own category, had been reduced to a handful of storefronts nobody outside their own neighborhoods could find on a map. The specialty chains it gave away did not save Kmart, because they were never the problem. And selling them off did not fix Kmart either, because the discount stores at the center of the whole company needed the one thing that money from a fire sale could never buy back: years of attention that had gone somewhere else instead. If a company giving away its own best businesses to save a business that was already dying sounds familiar, it is a pattern this channel keeps finding. Subscribe if you want to see where else it happened. And if you remember walking under that blue light yourself, tell me about it in the comments.